So good morning to you all. My name is Amit. I am a professor of psychology at the University of Haifa in Israel. And I'm really deeply grateful and also honored to be here with you all. We are living now, all of us here today, in the midst of a human rights crisis of epic and tragic proportion. Right now, across the world, there are more than 71 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes and their lives. I have no idea what 71 million means. One way to think about it is that it means that every 2 seconds, now, again, another human life was displaced. Now, due to the trauma and the stress, and what is the destruction of communities and families, this human rights crisis that we've all heard about and read about has turned into and has led to an emerging global mental health crisis. And it's a crisis of suffering and despair. And this crisis is unfolding in communities all over the world. In Damascus, and in Tripoli, and in Afghanistan, and Somalia, in Myanmar or Burma. And it's reaching all across the world to Athens, and Paris, and Berlin, and Istanbul, and all the way across the ocean to Sydney, right? And also from East Africa and Eritrea and Sudan, all the way to Tel Aviv in Israel, in the Middle East where I live. Beginning in 2006, forcibly displaced children and adults from Eritrea and Sudan, fleeing persecution and unspeakable horrors, began to seek refuge and safety in Israel. Some were lucky, I guess, or fortunate, to make their way through a really tough path, through Sudan and up through Egypt and up through the Sinai Desert and make it into Israel to seek safety and refuge. But far too many were kidnapped on the way and trafficked and tortured and ransomed. And only then were they able to make their way safely into Israel. I was planning to start crying on slide 11. It's only partially a joke, actually. And I want to share an important part of the Eritrean refugee experience with you all. And I want to show you a short bit from a documentary made by Karen Child, an amazing filmmaker. It is hard and painful to watch and to hear, I warn you. But it's important. It's important if we want to understand the lived experience of forced displacement. What does it mean to be in the body and mind of a refugee? And then, from that place, we'll talk about transforming that anger and that compassion into resistance and action.
Hello? Hello?
يا ربي بتجاوبني رعبتي.
Dear listeners, this is Meron Stefanos broadcasting from Stockholm, Sweden, Voices of Eritrean Refugees.
Ajura. The goal is like, I want to end this. Like, he hit a dog in Sweden. He go to jail for 6 months. You know? And here I listen to people being tortured every hour. And the whole world is watching, doing nothing, you know, it's just...
قصنا ترى إنا بحس أكو فينا على الكعب يعني هنت مو على إسرائيل راح لنا كلكم ده.
كم ديك في الكعب؟ 3
شيء 25,000.
They were melting plastic bags and dropping it in their bags. And this is the burns.
تاريخ العالم ترى ازاي فلتك عندنا بلغم اسسا ارتراوي بخلطه بن قرات حرج كم دي بالمهلنا كم دي بخنتاتنا نابي يكون كتكد بيدو نابي
بشا زودي يا مرارم شاب زي قلتكم يا تشلا يمدانا شما شاب شما
So what do we do? What can we do to resist this injustice and this oppression and to heal the suffering? So one place to start is, well, what kind of works, what's going on in the world already? A lot, actually, right? So there's amazing organizations like the UNHCR. These are international organizations that are working to document and provide for the basic needs of forcibly displaced people all across the world. There are remarkable nonprofit organizations like Doctors Without Borders and Humanity Crew that provide emergency medical and mental health crises on the ground in humanitarian crises. There are really inspiring local NGOs like Kuchinate in Tel Aviv. And they provide Eritrean women who have survived torture with financial autonomy and also community-based rehabilitation. And there's also amazing artists like the Syrian refugee Abdallah al-Omari, and they're raising awareness of the refugee experience through provocative and inspiring art. It's really powerful, actually. And it's beautiful. But what can we do, right? What can we do? And I started to ask myself several years ago, what can I do? What do I know that could maybe be of some help? And this is where Kim Yuval comes into my story. Kim was one of my first PhD students. God bless him, he finished a month ago. And Kim is a passionate human rights activist. This is that slide 11 I was telling you about. Kim was inspired by his grandmother, who had dedicated her life to caring for refugees of the Second World War. Now, truth be told, my mother was a child refugee of that war. And so I very much identified with Kim's refusal, his refusal to accept that oppression or to accept that injustice or to accept that suffering. And so I'm easily convinced. It's true, I get carried away. But Kim convinced me and our team to adapt our expertise in clinical psychological science and to do something to begin to care for African asylum seekers in our community. And so we moved our lab from this plush, lovely green campus in Haifa atop the Carmel Mountains overlooking the Mediterranean. It's really lovely. And we built a shoestring mobile lab in the urban heart of the African refugee community in South Tel Aviv. And we set 3 goals. We wanted to learn from refugees so that we can understand their mental health needs, and maybe we hope to identify malleable factors that might contribute to their resilience and their recovery. We hope to translate what we learn into a novel intervention that maybe we could use to begin to care for those who are now seeking refuge and safety in our community. And I do get carried away, as I said. I hoped that if we were successful, we could use this intervention and give it to others to care for forcibly displaced people across the world. And so we started. We conducted a number of studies among hundreds of African asylum seekers in Israel in the central bus station, in this tent in the desert outside of a detention center, among torture survivors in partnership with Physicians for Human Rights, and in Cucinate, that's that amazing local NGO taking care of women in South Tel Aviv. So, what did we learn? Bad news first or good news first? How about the bad news first? So you remember the good news. This is another slide 11, although it's not actually number 11. We found overwhelming evidence of a mental health crisis among African asylum seekers in our community. Specifically, we found that African asylum seekers in Israel had suffered from shockingly high rates of traumatic experiences, like an average of 7 different types of experiences, each one experienced multiple times. These include things like torture, imprisonment, being close to death, starvation, so on and so forth. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, it's pretty bad. Once they arrived to safety, they're forced to cope with this wide range of chronic stressors. This is like conflict with immigration officials, fear of deportation. Would you want to be deported, sent back to Eritrea or Sudan? They lack vocational, educational opportunities. They face discrimination. They face isolation. Yeah. A really hard life. Third, despite resilience and the will to survive and to thrive, no doubt, they also suffer at extremely high rates from what are actually invisible scars. Scars of forced displacement. And I didn't believe it after the first study. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I believed it after the second. But now, across multiple studies and samples, we found that as many as 55 to 80% of African refugees in Israel struggle with severe mental health problems, PTSD, depression, anxiety. And these are actually the highest rates of stress and trauma-related mental health problems that I have ever seen in any single community or any single population. It's a real mental health crisis, without any hyperbole, I think. But we also found that some of these asylum seekers had largely recovered or were on their way. And we worked to understand who they were, what was unique about their experience. And we found that refugees who were aware of their present moment experience with a quality of acceptance and compassion were also more likely to have begun to recover, despite the fact that they had the same experiences of trauma and chronic stress. Now, this modest correlational effect between mindfulness and recovery replicated again and again across these cross-sectional epidemiologic studies. And so we set out to develop a novel intervention for refugees targeting mindfulness and compassion in order to promote recovering and healing. We hoped. Remember the good news part? We're getting there. And it may seem a bit nuts to some of you to try to teach refugees from East Africa to meditate. A bit. Nevertheless, there's also actually a number of reasons to think that this might not be an entirely crazy idea. So first, our preliminary finding linking mindfulness to recovery is actually quite consistent with an emerging, now fast-growing body of science, which is documenting the curative effects of mindfulness and compassion training for stress and trauma-related mental health problems. Second, something kind of special about mindfulness. It targets these universal processes: attention, awareness, compassion. And these are processes that transcend language, and they transcend culture. And third, we live in the real world, right? Now, mindfulness is cool too because it's delivered in groups. It's quite low cost, and it's been implemented in many diverse contexts and among diverse populations. And so we hoped that this type of intervention might be feasible and scalable for the big picture problem of refugee mental health in the world. So we developed mindfulness-based trauma recovery for refugees. This is a mindfulness and compassion-based intervention that is trauma-sensitive and socioculturally adapted for forcibly displaced people. We hope that first, the intervention might help asylum seekers just find refuge and safety in their own body and in their own mind and their own lived experience, right? Moments of refuge and safety. And we hoped that doing so would help them to begin to recover and heal. The intervention involves 9 2.5-hour sessions, as well as home practice that's done through this really cool YouTube channel students built with guided meditation practices in Tigrinya. And the intervention includes things like psychoeducation on stress and mindfulness meditation that's closely grounded in mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and loving kindness practices to cultivate compassion for oneself and for others. And trauma-sensitive adaptations of mindfulness, like those developed by David Treleaven, to help ensure the safety of meditation among those that are very traumatized. We then deliver these practices in ways that are socio-culturally adapted. Very briefly, so for example, we have these cultural mediators and facilitators from the community in the group. There's a number of other examples. And finally, and importantly, the intervention is delivered within the community and by the community. We do that in a whole host of ways. So for example, we delivered it inside a space in Cucinate, in the heart of the refugee community. Half of our team are refugees. Members of the community take care of the kids of group participants during the sessions. Members of the community make this communal meal that we share during the sessions, so on and so forth. We then asked ourselves the question that I hope some of you are asking. Does it work? Does it really make sense to try to teach African refugees mindfulness and compassion practices? And how on earth could it possibly help? Well, so we set out to deliver the intervention and to test its feasibility, its efficacy, its mechanisms of action, and its safety. And our team worked very hard to recruit 158 Eritrean refugees, asylum seekers, men and women, and we randomized them experimentally to a waitlist control condition and to the mindfulness-based trauma recovery for refugees intervention. And we took it pretty seriously, and we conducted a wide range of assessments across levels of analysis in 21 time points before, during, and after the intervention. And I'm so relieved and happy to share that we finished data collection 3 weeks ago. So I can actually share a little bit of the preliminary findings with you. They're better than I'd expected. First, did mindfulness and compassion training help refugees to experience moments of refuge and safety? Let's start there, right? Just now. And here we see in the data over the course of these 9 mindfulness sessions, you see, the black bars show levels of calmness and tranquility experienced that week in their daily living outside of the sessions. And the white bars are these weekly elevation, these bursts of calmness and tranquility that they experience during each training session. And we also see this steady growth, slow cultivation of the capacity to feel calmness and tranquility in their lives. Here too, we see very similar effects on the training sessions, on feelings of happiness and joy, as well as the same steady growth of these positive feelings in daily living over time. Next, it's important to ask, did mindfulness and compassion training help refugees to begin to heal and to recover beyond these moments of refuge and safety? And remarkably, it really is kind of remarkable, I almost don't believe it. The answer might actually be yes for many of them. Now, although almost all of the Eritrean asylum seekers in the waitlist control condition still had PTSD at the end of the study like we'd expect, less than half of those who received mindfulness and compassion training still had PTSD. And even among the 48% that were still struggling with PTSD, the large majority actually had these clinical significant reductions in those symptoms. And those effects were maintained for almost all of them at follow-up, months later. So next, it's important to ask for some of you who are keen on this area of work. Okay, cool, but is mindfulness and compassion, is it safe for the refugees really? Might it be harmful to some of them? Maybe those who are struggling the most traumatized? And we found that there was only one single participant who demonstrated possible harm. We expected more, many more. Bottom line, it appears that their intervention is in fact safe for even the most vulnerable and traumatized refugees. It's good news. It's very good news. And so now going forward from here, we hope to transition to our third goal. I told you I get carried away, right? Well, now we want to reach many, and I'll add another many, thousands of refugees. First, we hope to carry out a large, multinational study of mindfulness-based trauma recovery in refugees. And candidly, I don't know how we're going to do it. I have no idea how we're going to support it. But we'll find a way. I hope. And second, we want to develop and test an e-health web-based platform to develop the intervention to reach those most in need that are actually very, very difficult to reach and access in our traditional formats of group delivery. Now, our time together is almost over. But before I let you go, there is someone I'd like you to meet and to hear. And you saw a little bit of him when Shannon presented. His name is Mogus, and I want you to remember Mogus. You don't have to remember me, but I want you to remember Mogus.
We refugees here, we are facing a lot of problems, especially with the deportation. It is the mind that gets me crazy, that gets me to depressed, because all the time thinking things, I'm addicted to it. I don't know how to stop it. When I stop it, I got peace. When I not know to stop it, I got crazy or I depressed. It's some like after you meditate, you become like new person. And then after so many hours, you get back where you have been. It's obvious, but for some more 4 minutes, you become someone very new. I hope so it will be distributed to all of the people and to become part of the refugee system. And it's like a medicine for me. Maybe a luxury for you. It's like a medicine for me. It's a different way of interpretation for it. I use it for like a medicine.
Apparently there's more than one slide 11 in this talk for me. So I'm really grateful to be part of what is actually quite a big team that carried out this work. Our community mediators and on-call psychiatrists and the research team and the amazing women at Cucinate and Meital in the lab. And I'm really grateful to Shannon and Jules Harvey of Elemental Media, and you saw Shannon before. And I really mean it because I learned something really important from Shannon. In working with her, we had to stop and sort of think about what we're doing and reflect, and I really came to understand the meaning and the power and the purpose of what we're trying to do. And I'll be grateful for her for that forever. We're grateful for the folks who have supported our work. This kind of work just wouldn't be possible without support. And if I can get through this, I will. I just want to thank, these are my kids. And they've taught me most of what I know about what it means to be present and what compassion means. And about what it actually means to have a refuge and to belong and to have a home and to feel safe. Thank you very much.